And I think for a lot of these content creators, if you're listening to this, you should stop what you're doing, take a week, and say, what can I do better with my channel?
You shouldn't have did that.
Come on! Get stop with this content! Oh,
Sick of everyone being a little bitch. I lost 2 tournaments. Bitch, I lost 28 in a row! Shut the fuck up!
0 cards played on turn 2 once again. Game 3, Kamal goes first. Same thing. Starts comboing. At this point, Cam doesn't even get a turn in this match.
Alright, why is Yugioh dying again?
A few days ago, the video essayist Out of Characters released a pretty good 30-minute essay discussing Yu-Gi-Oh! As a spectator sport. It talked about Yu-Gi-Oh! Being the TCG equivalent of a fighting game, and it drew a lot of comparisons between Yu-Gi-Oh! And Melee when critiquing the YCS livestream experience. You should really go and see it before watching this, but the main takeaways from his essay is that the amount of dead air during livestreams is atrocious, and the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community doesn't do enough to weave overarching narratives around its top-level players. So in this video, I'm going to touch on all that and suggest what we could be doing better as a community. Yep, that's the introduction. Or were you expecting this as a video rant? But before I dive into all that, we first need to address something. To make a long story short, Out of Characters also included interviews with Distant Coder and Phi in his essay. At the very end of the video, Phi delivered this serious, deadpan threat to the entire YugiTuber community, basically demanding that channels like MBT and Farfa make better content. And then a day later, Out of Characters just deleted that part from the video entirely.
Oh, I see. This is a prank. My god, I honestly never figured you were a prankster, Goku, but you son of a bitch. You got me. Okay, who is it?
So in the initial draft of the script, I was operating under the belief that Phi had asked Characters to include that bit at the end of his video. But when I went to gather footage of the full interview on Characters' Patreon, yes, I did give that fucker $5 for the sake of investigative journalism, I discovered that the opposite was true. In the interview, Phi gave this response after Characters pressed him on what the YugiTuber community could be doing better to improve their content. The issue, though, is that Characters didn't include his own question in the video when he added Phi's response to the end of the essay, so it basically took Phi out of context. This has yet again put me in a weird position since this entire section was predicated on the idea that I thought Phi was acting like a man-child. I mean, it lined up with his posts on Twitter that I read while doing research for this video. But what most likely happened was that Characters didn't realize that the way he framed Phi's quote could have been taken the wrong way, and that prompted him to remove it and lock it behind a paywall. That being said, I do think it's important to tackle Phi's quote under this particular framing. And the reason why is because it helps break down a small issue that I have with this essay. Simply put, this idea that Yu-Gi-Oh's declining player base would suddenly go away if we had content that more closely resembled the Melee community is just fucking insane when you sit down and really think about it. Aside from the fact that most Melee content already has a ton of overlap with the content found in the Yu-Gi-Oh community, it also has to be said that the Yu-Gi-Oh community already produces a ton of high quality entertainment that's on par with other popular games. There's already a ton of insane talent like the Law YGO, Renegade Redoer, and the Curry Bandits that put out a ton of high quality projects and discussion videos. It's not like this game is devoid of that sort of content, and trying to force channels like MBT or Farfa into that style of content just seems like a waste of time. If people want to watch this kind of stuff, they'll go and look for it. Overall, I think hyperfixating on this nebulous issue distracts from the actual problems that Yu-Gi-Oh is facing. There is no panacea for an obtuse game with horrible balancing. Konami just needs to make the advanced format more approachable to play and watch, and that requires a very aggressive and eternally consistent banless philosophy. Genesis format has already proven that Konami is capable of pulling that off. They just need to apply the same methodology to the advanced format and determine what the power ceiling of this game should look like. If you're confused about what I'm even talking about, I would check out Renegade's recent video about Yu-Gi-Oh's current design philosophy. I don't agree with all the points in that video, but it is probably the most succinct distillation of everything wrong with this game currently. Anyways, I don't have anything to add about Coder. He didn't act like a crazy person. Anyways, now that I got that out of my system, I can share what I thought about the video.
This is mad serious. They're trying to get 70% of the $45.
For starters, I agree that YCS commentators have been historically awful. They've gotten a lot better in the last year or two, especially the European commentators, but this is a very recent development.
And here we add the correct choice, which is... But just the end, as it is, there can be only one, and that is Pierre.
That being said, there's still room for improvement. The biggest issue with YCS commentary, I think, is that the casters aren't allowed to have any real opinions about the decks and cards being played. I fully support people being able to play whatever decks they want. I mean, my Floodgate video is basically proof of that despite how flawed it is. But if you're walking into a tournament with a full-on stun deck designed to force a ton of non-games, you should probably be treated as a supervillain by the commentators. I mean, everyone knows that you're going to get up to some fucking shenanigans. It drives me insane whenever a Floodgate is being flipped up during a YCS, and the commentator is like, "And Daniel's just flipped up the different dimension ground he's sighted into his deck. How will the opponent respond?" He's probably gonna respond by scooping. Are you really that fucking dense? Ideally, a good commentator doesn't have to manufacture any sort of hyper energy. They often just read the state of the game and convey the actual impact of that. If whatever is going on isn't that interesting, the last thing you should be doing is trying to pretend that it is. And like Fi said in the essay, a lot of that comes down to understanding the historical context. To show what I mean by this, we'll use Zane and Mango's match from Smash Summit 11 as an example because it's a masterclass in esports commentary. Right off the bat, there's quite a few things to note. You can tell that there's good chemistry between the hosts, with Waffles in particular bringing a lot of energy to the broadcast. And on top of that, there's decent evaluation going on mid-match of each player's strategic plays. But more importantly, the commentators do a lot to build on the mythology of Melee during this match. At the start of Game 5, notice that the commentators emphasize how historic it would be if Mango could take another win on Final Destination against Zane and force a Game 6 scenario.
This is insanity. I don't think that we're going to go to... There's no way that we go to a reset. Flash is a big house 9, but let's not speak too soon.
Can Mango win twice on Final D versus Marth?
If Mango... Here's the thing. Mango's been playing so nice. He has not been sloppy at all.
Wow.
But if he starts messing up anything, Zane's punish has been incredible.
This is the stage that could really hurt. Yes.
The reason why this moment is so significant is because FD is such a good stage for Marth, which is Zane's main character. So the fact that Mango, a veteran Fox player of the game who is admittedly a little past his prime, might have the potential to overcome Zane, indisputably the best player during that time, on his own counterpick stage is just insane. If Mango pulls this off, it would be a major upset. And he does pull it off.
Just listen to Brandon.
I should be beyond all this stove shit I be on. When I hit the kitchen, I feel like Celine Dion. It's all coming back to me now. Vision came alive in your face, I'm the 3D god. He started dancing when them bullets hit his side. Pray they miss him, shoot a spit off like Missy, like hee-hee-ha. But if I go Rose, then my niggas go Rose. If I pull up Ghost, hold up. How come every time I win your name, me too? Like when I got a brick, you was like me too. When I signed my deal, you was like me too. When I was fucked up, it was just me, where was you? 32 plus 4, keep it a kilo.
Mango's somehow playing like good Melee under this pressure.
Okay? I don't know how it's possible. I mean, pressure makes diamonds, Bobby.
On my skin, melanin, Fanta, promethazine. Dirty green, blue honey fiend. How we go from dancing on things to magazines.
Zane's dropping the punish.
That's it.
Mango winning his first ever Smash Summit.
And the biggest prize pool in Smash
history.
I cannot believe it, Scar.
Mango a champion through the ages.
He has finally done it.
What makes Melee commentary so brilliant, and really most fighting game commentary in general, isn't that they're forcing any sort of overimportance on the game. There's always been good commentary in the Melee scene, even before the Melee doc. The reason why it's so brilliant is because the commentators recognize why these moments would be so significant to the story of this game's competitive history, and then they capitalize on that observation. Good commentary is all about recognizing the impact of a given moment in time and properly conveying that. And that requires a level of honesty as much as it does a deep history of the game. To shift gears for a bit, I do agree that the majority of the Yu-Gi-Oh community doesn't have that much investment in the story of the game's competitive history. We've had 25 years to compile a proper timeline of this game's storied history, and the community has sat on their asses and done jack shit. That being said, I don't think this is necessarily a problem for the game, nor do I think it's the reason why spectators struggle to identify with most competitive Yu-Gi-Oh players. In Out of Characters' essay, a lot of time is spent focusing on the personality of Yu-Gi-Oh's top players, with Distant Coder going as far as to compare them to Melee players like Mewtwo King and Cody Schwab. First of all, do not put Mewtwo King in the same category as Cody. The world would be a much better place if we had more honest people like Mewtwo King. Rest in peace, Hacks Money. Secondly, I do agree that most competitive Yu-Gi-Oh players aren't these charismatic balls of energy like Triff or Sam. We'll talk about why that is later in the video, but I don't think that's really an issue. And to understand that, we'll need to talk about why people watch esports. What you have to understand about spectators in esports is that they often look for players that they identify with, and that doesn't always mean in terms of their personality.
No, you're cheating.
You're gonna learn! This is the real world! You learn it early, son!
That's all you ever do in your house?
Obviously, it helps when a player has a unique identity that complements their level of skill. Players like Sonic Fox and even Mewtwo King are often cited as iconic figures in the fighting game community for that reason. But in an esport, a player's personality and skill aren't the only factors that can endear a viewer to that player. If I'm watching a Melee tournament, for example, and I don't see any recognizable names in the bracket that I want to root for or against, I generally root for people who are playing characters that I like. For me, this typically defaults to characters like Sheik or Marth. They're both characters that I've messed around with in Melee, and I just happen to be a fan of both The Legend of Zelda and Fire Emblem. But even then, I'll sometimes just root for people playing lower tier characters if I'm familiar with the game's meta. It's always hype in Melee whenever a Yoshi, Pikachu, Captain Falcon, Samus, Donkey Kong, or Luigi main are able to progress through a tournament bracket, and the reason why is because the odds are often stacked against them. In Yu-Gi-Oh, this phenomenon is difficult to achieve because the meta shifts at such a rapid rate. There usually isn't room for deck specialists like Sunseed Jess to thrive for very long. Archetypes are constantly phased in and out of the meta, and the reason for this is because the financial success of a Yu-Gi-Oh booster box is currently dependent on how much it warps the meta. This is strictly different from other esports where a new character is treated as this massive event for the game. We'll use League of Legends as an example. League usually releases only about 4 to 6 champions on average each year. But on top of that, there's often a lot of balance patches that allow the characters already in the game to remain relevant. The reason for this is that League's established cast does a lot to carry the identity of their game, which isn't too dissimilar to a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! But the major difference here is that in a game like League, pretty much every character in this game has the potential to do well due to aggressive game balancing. My god, we're actually getting our asses kicked by League players. That's fucking depressing. Ideally, Yu-Gi-Oh! Should operate in the same way. I mean, the pieces for it are already there. We have multiple different anime that an entire generation has grown up with, and the original anime is about as iconic as something like Dragon Ball Z. However, with the sole exception of Blue Eyes, most of the decks from the anime are just hot ass. If you really want to understand why newcomers and casual Yu-Gi-Oh! Players don't care that much about the competitive scene, it's because their frame of reference for what Yu-Gi-Oh! Should be is dictated by the anime. For the longest time, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has succeeded off the back of being a very casual-friendly game with a relatively niche and dense competitive scene in the background. But as the game continued to evolve and power creep continued to push the game to its limits, the game began to lose a lot of its original identity. That isn't to say that I think the game's current design philosophy is bad, but it is vastly different from what it used to be. Elements of the modern game, such as the length of turns and the tendency to shut out the going second player, has produced a situation where the game filters out players that don't vibe with this very narrow mold of what Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be. So it's not really a surprise that a lot of the top players currently in this game fall into this boring archetype. It's just natural selection. There isn't a lot of room for different kinds of players to succeed at Yu-Gi-Oh! Because the game itself is only really fun for people with insane amounts of patience and tolerance. But that's not the type of player that most casuals like to watch. This is what they like to watch.
Yugi lost! Yugi gave his Duel Monsters Championship crown to some nobody? No one deserves that title but me! Hold on. I don't want to hear another word. You're a disgrace to the game, Yugi.
Konami, whether they've realized it or not, have created this expectation within the casual fanbase of what a top-level Yu-Gi-Oh! Player is supposed to look and act like. It's because of this why casual players respond positively to things like the scripted duels between voice actors, and it's also why this game has such a strong culture of pet decking. The fact of the matter is that Konami has a major responsibility to cater to these players if they want the game to succeed, whether it's through the game's design and balancing, or even just the culture that the game's design promotes. But until very recently, they've failed spectacularly at this. It's because of this failure why we've bled so much of our casual player base. The game still doesn't promote enough back and forth, and because of that, it often results in an awful spectating experience. But even if you were to just ignore the anime's legacy and only judge the game based on the longevity of its archetypes, there's also not a lot of decks that players can expect to see on a regular basis. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, an example of a competitive archetype with longevity and casual appeal would probably be something like Labyrinth or Branded. They each have an understandable gameplay loop, their artwork is fucking iconic, and they generally manage to worm their way into top cut rather often despite these decks being somewhat old now. But due to oversights in their design, the community often shits on them due to how awful cards like Sanctifier or the Virus Traps are. So how is a newcomer supposed to react to this? They see this deck that has a really cool theme and a pretty understandable playstyle, but they don't know whether to root for it because of the stigma that the deck carries. The situation is just a complete fucking mess. As far as solving this problem goes, there's a few things we can do beyond just banning problematic cards. First off, there's the representation issue. More people should be able to construct versions of these decks without having to rip packs or buy all the singles online, and the best way to achieve that would be through structure decks. I would like to propose an idea that was pitched by Paul of Team APS in a recent MST video. Paul suggested that we scrap the legendary duelist-style products such as Maze of Masters and Battles of Legend Monster Mayhem, and instead create structure decks for those featured archetypes. This is essentially what Magic the Gathering does with a lot of their sets. They generally release a few commander decks designed around the set they're promoting, and then they put support for those decks into the booster sets. Yu-Gi-Oh! Already does this a bit with their normal structure decks, but they don't do it enough. By comparison, Magic the Gathering released 13 commander decks this year alone. Aside from the fact that having more structure decks every year would make the player base happy, raising the amount of structure decks released each year would also increase the amount of sales for products containing additional support for those structure decks. The recent Branded structure deck is an incredible example of this, since it's going to receive a ton of new cards in Burst Protocol. Secondly, games of Yu-Gi-Oh! Need to not be a complete bore to sit through, at least on average. I'm very much a proponent of letting people play the game how they want, but the game's design needs to facilitate that with proper balancing. There can still be all-in combo decks that produce a single towers, for example, but they really should have tangible costs when setting up their end board. That means that the deck should have extenders that expend resources from their hand, graveyard, or potentially even their own extra deck, or perhaps it should box the user into a certain playstyle. There should be a tangible cost for summoning such a belligerent card, and the fact there isn't is the problem here because it further stacks the odds against the going second player. The fact that this isn't the norm in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is kind of worrying. Finally, turns in Yu-Gi-Oh! Need to be shorter on average. Something we can start doing right now is normalizing support that greatly restricts what archetypes are able to bridge into. To show you what I mean, I went ahead and prepared some custom cards which are on screen right now. I do want to note, by the way, that I made these cards the night before the new Dark Magician support was revealed. Funnily enough, it pairs pretty well with the cards I brewed, but my main inspiration was actually to provide support for Dark Magician Girl, along with all the Magician Girl cards currently present in the legal card pool. Namely, the Fusion Monster was designed with Kiwi Magician Girl, Lemon Magician Girl, and the Shining Sark Dark Magician Girl in mind. As for the Searcher and the one-card Fusion Summon, they each have incredibly restrictive locks on them that basically dictate how you're supposed to build your deck. Like, you could technically play the Fusion without these two cards, but setting it up would probably be far less consistent. If anyone from Konami is watching this is the one thing you need to take away from this video. If you want to reduce the amount of decks that are able to bridge into other archetypes, you need to put these sorts of restrictions on key starters and extenders. I mean, if Habakiri had a restriction like this that kept it from being activated to turn a non-Mitsurugi or Reptile monster with special summon from the deck, we could have solved a lot of issues before they even happened. That all being said, I don't think every archetype needs this type of restriction. In fact, you would only need to realistically throw it onto a single card in most cases, like with our Habakiri example. These deck building locks are basically something that needs to be evaluated on a per archetype basis when either designing legacy support or producing new archetypes. The point I'm trying to reach is that we just need to be doing this more often. It would prevent a lot of oversights from slipping through the cracks during the card design process, and I don't mean this from just a power creep perspective. Part of making a lower tiered deck better is ensuring that new support can't be abused outside of its own deck, which is why all decks, regardless of their current placement in the meta, need more locks like this whenever they receive objectively broken support. Case in point, the new Dark Magician Fusion monster is a ticking time bomb. When this card was announced, quite a few people criticized the fact that you can make this off of a single Diabell star. If Konami wants to keep this card legal and have it benefit mostly Dark Magician decks, they'll have to start putting locks on any new Geza Tamaya's targets. Otherwise, we'll have to end up hitting Diabell star. And I would rather we not do that. This is why printing these sorts of locks on card effects more often would be healthy for the game as a whole. We would have to ban fewer cards in the long run because it would essentially future-proof these cards from being abused. I think if you were to make all three of these changes, we would not only be able to make players and spectators happy, but we would also be able to better rein in decks during the card design process. Shifting topics one last time, I do agree that there's a lot of dead air during Yu-Gi-Oh! Live streams. Anyone who has actually watched an entire YCS before knows how awful it is to sit through Guess the Card. Personally, I tend to tab out and work on scripts like this one whenever there isn't a game going on, but most people aren't that patient. They're just going to go watch something else. It is easily the biggest issue with YCS live streams, and if Konami would just address this issue alone, the viewing experience would be at least 50% better. What's funny though is that this problem is very easy to solve. So here's the current broadcast structure during a round of Swiss. The purple represents the period before the round starts where players are looking for where to be seated. It's typically depicted with footage of the event hall with tons of players walking around the venue. Sometimes there's ad breaks during this period as well. The blue represents the feature match. The green represents the after-match interview. I drew it a little bigger than it actually is because otherwise you probably wouldn't be able to even see it. And finally, the red represents the Guess the Card segment. There's also sometimes an ad break during that period as well. So, how would you go about solving this issue? Well, the only way you're really going to make viewers happy is if there's more gameplay on screen during this time. But it can't just be some sort of filler match. It needs to still be relevant to that round of Swiss, because otherwise the match will have no bearing on that round of the tournament, and the viewer will realize that they're sitting through filler. The way you would solve this... Give me a second. Gotta move my drink. The way you would solve this is to record 2 feature matches during each round of Swiss. How it would work is that after the main feature match is completed, you would rewind the footage back to the last game of the other feature match and run that footage to fill for time. This is functionally the same as just having a filler match, but it's relevant to whatever round of Swiss is currently being played. And because nobody has seen this footage yet, nobody in chat will be able to spoil the outcome of the game either. This would solve a lot of issues with the stream's watchability, all while giving us more Yu-Gi-Oh! To watch. I really don't see any sort of downside to this solution. So that about wraps up this video. I do think Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a lot of potential as an esport, but Konami just needs to stop tripping over themselves. They need to make sure that they're properly identifying their player base and that they're making products and content that appeals to them, whether they be a competitive player, a casual duelist, a collector, or even just a newcomer. So, in summary, give us a sequel to Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, you fucking cowards! We would solve so many issues with Yu-Gi-Oh! If it just had an old school anime again set in the modern day. You could still have Synchros, Xyz, Pendulums, and Link Monsters, but you could just have the series be set in a different continuity from 5Ds. Also, Konami, give us some actual creatures again. For a game called Duel Monsters, there really isn't a whole lot of monster-themed archetypes to choose from in the current meta. It's pretty much either dragons or waifus, and sometimes both. And while we're on the topic of dragons, for the love of God, Konami, just give us some Red Eye support. Yu-Gi-Oh! Would become the best card game ever if Joey's deck were meta. Just trust me on this one. Anyways, remember to subscribe and hit the bell, leave your comments down below, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Never was a thought, just infatuated with guns. Never was a gangster till I graduated to one and got the rap of a villain, the weapon concealing. Took the image of a thought, captured a villain, willing to stick out my neck for respect. If it meant life or death, never lived to regret what I said. When you're me, people just wanna see if it's true, if it's you, what you say in your rap, what you do.
How do we do that?
Oh, I'll think of something. When the fucking judge lets me off, all you motherfuckers gotta do is set me off. I'm violating all the motherfucking pets.
You're just making this up as you go along.
Yep, but I do it brilliantly. These bullets, as soon as I pull it, you sweat bullets. An excellent method to Cause instead of you murdering, you can hurt him and come back again and kick dirt in him. It's like pouring salt in the wounds. Soul gets sued. You can smell the lawsuit soon as I walk in the room. Everybody halts and stops, calls the cops. All you see is pictures coming out their halls and tops, running and ducking out the Hot Rocks parking lot. You'll all get shot, whether it's your fault or not. Cause I'm a soldier.
Being a champion is not about getting to the top. Being a true champion is getting to the top, losing it, and getting it back. But I'm coming back for my title. Because I didn't quit. I didn't run off. I took my ass beatings like a man, and I will be back at the top. And when I do, I'm going to shove my long dick from the top of the mountain into everyone's throat.